Yapalingana, Yatwacha. My name is Nika Lehman. I'm a descendant of the Trollwollo people of northeast Tasmania, and I grew up in Nipalina, Hobart, and I've been living here for 10 years this year, which is remarkable. I want to thank Blak and Bright for inviting me to moderate this conversation. I want to thank Isabel and her father there as well, and all the other elders in the room. Thank you so much for being here. And also I want to acknowledge the Aboriginal people in the room. There's so many, which is great. I hate that thing when you're doing an acknowledgement and it's like, and acknowledging the Aboriginal people in the room, and you're like, no, there's no one. So it's really lovely to have mob at the front. Maybe we'll just start this session with some bios. I'll just read the bios of the people next to me in their own words, and then we'll go through with a little reading that each of them are going to do. I'll ask some questions of them individually, and then we'll go through to a group yarn. I think I introduced myself enough, but I'm also a poet and writer, so it's a real privilege to be able to talk to my peers today. And I hope I do an okay job with this wielding of one tiny hour, which is already ticking by. So we'll start with the furthest away, John. John Morrissey is a Melbourne writer of Kalkadoon descent. His work has been published in Overland, Voiceworks, Meanjin, and the anthology This All Come Back Now. He was the winner of the 2020 Boundless Mentorship and the runner-up for the 2018 Nakata Brophy Prize. His first collection of stories, Firelight, was published in 2023. And then we have Stone Mother's Cold. Stone Mother's Cold is an Aranda gem currently based in Nam. A crystalline being posing as a human with drag as their main medium, the queer art form centres their other art practices, combining them to create multidisciplinary projects. These projects are used to explore Black futurism, gender and sexuality, their experiences with colonialism and living ... which I love. I love the ... Okay, and Susie Anderson is a proud Wagayer and Wamba Wamba woman from Western Victoria. A writer of poetry and non-fiction, her work reflects on the hidden layers of visual arts practice, country, memory and place. In 2010, Susie became part of the editorial committee of Voiceworks magazine, where she developed and honed her poetry practice. Okay, I understand the ... now. That's an extended bio that goes to another page. And when I click on the link, it doesn't go there. So we're going to have to cut it a little short. But This is Susie. Thank you so much for joining us. And Susie also has a book that has just been published, The Body Country, which I really enjoyed reading along with John's this week. So does anyone feel really inclined to go first, second or last? I should have asked you this backstage. I have got you going first.
I can go first, if only just to prove that I've done something since 2010.
I know.
I swear that I have. It was like 14 years ago.
I'm so sorry that this doesn't go any further, but you know, this is going to just demonstrate how much can happen in 10 years or more, 14 years. So yeah, maybe if we just do a 3 to 5 minute reading, and then we'll come back and I'll ask you a few questions.
Sure. So today, this panel being called Young, Black and Deadly, we were all sort of talking about how that lands for us, because I'm in my mid-30s and I don't necessarily think of myself as like young, but I think in the context of First Nations cultures, like we still have so much to learn always from our elders and from country. And along those lines, I wanted to read a sequence of poems from my collection, which is about a young woman sort of returning to the lakes of her her lands, her homelands in Western Victoria. Although, you know, my poetry is like loosely autobiographical, but, you know, in my opinion, like writing should sort of have a relationship to the truth, but not necessarily always be true. So these are sort of based up around Wagaya country, which is just north of Horsham, around Dimboola and up that way. I was thinking about Lake Hindmarsh, which is one of our kind of traditional sites up there. And yeah, that's without further ado, this is Lake People. Here's how it goes, or at least I think so. This is the one story we're allowed to tell, not with the name of the bad man we weren't allowed to speak of. We were too scared to say it even now. I'm not allowed to say it. That's what Nanny said to us, and your father knew it too, so that wouldn't have been passed down anyway. But this one is well known, and we used to get told this version by Granny, but Mum told it a different way. But it's been so long now that I can't remember exactly what made their lake stories different, only that they would carry on about it. You never wanted to get them started on this story in particular, but any story really. Anyway, I'll tell you the one about the two brothers. Hey, yeah, I'm here now. Can you tell me whereabouts I'm meant to park and look for this thing? I definitely came in on the western side, so from what Aunt told me, I should just stay on the turn-off after the pub and I'll come out on the western side of the lake. But now I'm here, it's bigger than I remember, and I don't want to start walking around if I'm on the wrong side. Yeah. No, there's no water. I guess it hasn't rained this season yet. So I should be right to walk around for a bit. I just want to find that, yep, you know exactly what I'm looking for. I don't think I've ever seen it full, so it's kind of weird that people water ski here, watched by those two brothers. So which way? People abandon this place in winter. Lake is dry, white ochre, bright, expanding flat, low down through brush onto shore. Bulrushes at ankle height, waver, bottles, cans, rubbish, well beyond rustling. Eucalypts join in ocean sound. Gotta be ours, even though she's pale. What do you think? Can you sense the pelican spirit? You'd have to ask. It sounds like she was talking about us just now. Not proper, that young one, and she got the story wrong. It was me chased the spider away, not you. And it wasn't my fault we couldn't save the squirrel. Not that he deserved it anyway, but it's the law of country now. Wait, it was me with the spider this time, and you saved the squirrel from the eagle other time. No wonder these ones didn't pass on the story proper way. It happened to us and we can't even get it right. Where do you think she's going now? That's the wrong way, girl.
Susie, I think I didn't mention this in the email exchange that we had before this, but I actually had highlighted that section. It really spoke to me. And I have a lot of questions for you that I would love to ask off the side, but one of the things that we noticed when I was organising this was that there is crossovers where we all seem to be interested in conceptions of time that aren't necessarily conventional Western narratives. And I just want to acknowledge that now, and I want to ask you about that a bit later, but it feeds into the question next, which is maybe you could talk about, so you read, was that 4 different sections?
Yep.
Yeah, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the lake itself, but also those voices that come through in the sections. And I really want to know if any of them are almost verbatim, because the way that they are spoken is so real that I was wondering, is one of them like a voice memo?
No, I actually don't. I know some people write like that, like recording things, but no, I haven't sort of moved into that phase of writing yet. But yeah, I did want them to have a really immediate kind of address in a way, and to be sort of, yes, they're like from one person to another. So the first one is sort of like my, kind of like an auntie speaking about a story that, she half remembers, and like, as young people, we sort of are told, like, sit with your elders and just listen, and then you sort of do, and sometimes they just sort of wander around in circles with the story, and then, like, so that's kind of what the first segment is about. And then the second one is sort of like I said, it comes from a place of truth, and I'd taken some time off working, I don't remember when this was, maybe 2018 or 19, and I was driving around country, and I went up to Lake Hindmarsh, and I was sort of there, like, in the winter. It had been really dry, so you could literally drive across the lake, and like people go like water skiing and stuff up on these lakes, and there's a bit of a like culture of this like camping and stuff up around the Western District. But it has this eerie sort of tinge to it. I don't know, I think in my head it's because they're so racist and they won't acknowledge First Peoples, but that's just one person's opinion. But you can walk around the perimeter of the lake and see these scar trees that people from hundreds of years ago or thousands, I don't actually know the dates, but have been making canoes, making shields and all sorts of things. So you can see these scar trees with your own eyes. It's there for all to see, and I guess I wanted to capture that sort of tension and contrast, and the seeking as well that you have. And I think on that particular visit, like I was just there by myself for whatever reason. I wasn't able to go with family, and there's some sort of I don't know, a grief that you feel with not having kind of immediate access to story, but having families scattered around and not like being able to kind of congregate and do a trip to country together, which hopefully we will do at some point.
Which maybe makes the immediacy of the sounds of engines, of people doing water skiing and things like that, that's the immediacy, that's the narrative that's being written on in front of you, and it can be really hard when you're kind of, talking about something that you want to know more details. Is the scar tree 100 or 1,000 years old? We don't know, but there's this kind of competing narratives, competing temporal feelings in the place that maybe is part of that disconcerting sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I had this idea in the final two sections of this sequence to kind of bring the voice of country, who's been witness to it all, and then the voice of these two brothers, Bram, who are like featured in a lot of Wagaya stories, and they got up to all sorts of mischief. They were cheeky buggers, and hunting squirrels. And then there's a story about a spider. And I think them just sort of having a quarrel in the end of that sequence is that cheeky tone that mob all we know and have, like, with our different family and community, just to sort of show, like you say, that cyclical tonality to the way we exchange story.
Great, awesome. That's probably a good transition, actually. How do you feel about going next, Stone?
Sure.
Yeah.
Straight into it?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
You can give context now or later, whatever you prefer.
I might do a excerpt from The Fae, and that premiered at Boy Festival in 2021. Yes, so sorry. She realized she should have said bye, but the creek flowed, waiting, as she found a spot on the bank and let the frays of her skirt sway in the water, let her hair follow the flow of the creek, let herself breathe and sit and be. The creek stirred, expecting, but unfortunately she was empty. The creek rose, engulfing, with its healing waters, and there was nothing left to heal. So the creek took her in and gave her a new home. The Fae was, I had all these little black fairies that kind of talking about my experiences living in Nam, and yeah, I like the idea of black fairies being a good metaphor, I guess, for like black queer mob, because we are kind of hidden in narratives, and the idea of fairies like also being a colonial, that could be like the idea of fairies being the people beforehand, and that's how white people kind of put black people into folklore and mythology, is kind of create, over time they turn into mythology and turn into these fairies, and that's what the Fae was kind of about. And then I might read something from Alluvium, which premiered in Year Boy Festival last year. And they are these like little pups, thylacine pups that are biopunk, made from like, they're fossilized gold, and they've been stuck in a collection at the museum for thousands of years, and they've just kind of come free. And they're just talking about their little tragic origin story. The pups. Our rivers run with gold, but our bodies ain't for you. Its shimmery flecks behold, you made my inside sick, but on my tongue lingers tasteful memories of you. A gulp so sweet at first, and once I have swallowed, I digest what I've consumed. The bile churns away, leaving in my stomach bitter, confusing pain. I've waved them away so, as butterflies flitter, from the white gaze we lit up and came back to shine it on them, no longer servants for their burning eyes, but absorbed from the virtual reality and placed in these vessels they haphazardly plodded together. Disrupting the flow we were in, they cloned us, pulling apart and putting pieces together they liked on their search for genetic perfection. I think that's probably 3 minutes.
That's just so interesting because... Thank you. I don't know if you've read John's book, but John has a short story about like the cloning of thylacines, and also another story about gold flecks and gold. So it's just so interesting, the resonances between the three of you in preparing for this. So, okay, why thylacines? As a Tasmanian, I obviously want to know.
We have a story back home about like these, that's like the rangers back home in Bundoora, Alice Springs, and how they were formed from, the story is like these two dogs fighting, and that's like their big tussle around town is like what creates all these like shapes in the canyons and divots in the ground and stuff. And one of them's an intruder and comes onto country, and the story is kind of being said as like two camp dogs, but older like interpretations are that the original one was the thylacine, and then the intruder one was the dingo, and so that's like historically telling the story of, and like the change in ecology, and yeah, the story of dingoes coming into this continent like 4,000 years ago, kind of thing.
Amazing. Yeah, I think there are petroglyphs, rock carvings of thylacines up in the Kimberley as well. So yeah, it's really cool to be able to like access that deep time in the way you're representing something. That's great. So tell me a little bit, while we're thinking about deep time and geology and rocks, tell me about the crystalline element in your bio. I'm curious about this association with minerals.
Yes, well, as my drag name is Stone Motherless Cold, stone, I guess, just kind of like appears so much in my life. My totem is rock wallaby, and the in language, that's the name's a Potoranya, which means like from stone, and kind of also acknowledging like country, like out under origin, we came from dust and we came from like, crawling and appearing out of the dust of country, but also like space dust and like Big Bang and the beginning of like minerals being like across the universe and like minerals being brought from space and life maybe being brought from space. And I don't know, there's a lot of, it appears a lot in, but also as like a gender fluid, sister girl, non-binary being, I like the idea of being this crystalline creature made from earth, and that to me makes like, I am made of minerals from like iron and calcium and bone, and I'd rather that than a gendered, I don't know, human piece of flesh, I guess. That sounds more sexy, being a piece of crystal.
I don't know, rocks are pretty hot.
And they're like living, like, I don't know, that's just,
that's right.
I'm from rock and wallabies, I don't know, like,
That's really great. I love that. Another good segue, perhaps, John, thinking about your work, because one of the questions I want to ask you later, which I'm not going to ask you now, but is about the role of country or landscapes in your work. So maybe that's something that we'll catch a little of in your reading if you feel like beginning, and feel free to introduce it in any way you like or not.
So this is the opening of my story, The Last Penny, from my collection. My brother Stephen kept diaries his whole life. One of my earliest memories of him sitting on the floor of our bedroom, facing the wall, filling notebook after notebook with his neat handwriting. I thought for a long time that this scribbling was connected with his nighttime prayers, an activity he carried out crouched jealously in the corner of the room. I thought that he wrote down in daylight what he had whispered in darkness. I pried as any sibling would, but he kept his diaries in a locked metal box, and I never got my hands on the key. The diary I have in front of me on the desk now is the only one of his I've ever been able to look through. About 2/3 of it have been filled. The entries run from 29 January to 28 April of the year that he died. His writing is still perfectly legible, although the cover of the diary has been warped by intense heat, and little bubbles have burst and hardened in the plastic. I can't shake the feeling that he intended for me to read this diary, or knew that it would come to me somehow. Take, almost at random, this line from the entry dated 21 March. I would say that there are maybe 2 or 3 sympathetic people in the world that would look upon my life with anything other than revulsion and shame. It is as if he wants me to ask, who are these other people who will show him sympathy? Does he even include me as one of them? Do I wonder if there are others who knew him better than I did, who loved him when I failed to love him? He liked to say hurtful things and then study my reactions. In the end, I couldn't spend any more time with him. It was too damaging to my dignity, which was already frayed from the security protocols. Stephen, unfailingly perceptive, made a note of this in mid-February, following one of my visits. Amy always arrives in a foul mood, complaining about the pat-downs and the x-rays she has to put up with in order to come and see me. She despises the security staff, especially the women, although so far as I can tell, they're very courteous with her. I understand that it is simply a transference, as she cannot yet allow herself to despise her flesh and blood. My brother lacked a sense of proportion. He was an egoist. Small things were of vast importance if they touched him and what he considered to be his soul. Big things, worlds of suffering and misery, were of no account at all, mere rounding errors in the cosmic calculation. His diary records in neurotic detail matters that healthier minds would consider trivial. As a result, in 200 pages, it only manages to traverse a period of 3 months. My brother has been ash for almost a year now. Those sympathetic souls Stephen spoke of, take the claim at its highest, and let us say there are 3 such people. Let us also assume that I am one of these people, and that our mother was one as well. I think I can guess who the 3rd is. A creek ran along the rear of the property where Stephen and I grew up. The creek lay at the foot of an embankment of red clay, which became slick and treacherous whenever it was damp. One wrong step could send you careening down to the water's edge. The creek divided our patch from the sheep and cattle property next door, which was owned by an absentee banker from Melbourne and worked by unfriendly strangers. In the middle, the creek became quite fast and deep, and a little whirlpool developed. Not strong enough to endanger even a child, but enough to catch and swallow up small branches released upstream. The bed of the creek was soft, slick mud, which spread around your toes when you stepped into it. Sometimes we would duck under the water and surface with huge handfuls of this black mud disintegrating in our hands. When we held it up to the sunlight, we fancied that we saw bright flecks glittering in it, and this gave us the idea that there was gold in the creek.
Great, thank you. So, is there anything, before I ask you the questions that I have written down, is there anything that you wanted to offer or expand on from that excerpt of the short story?
So I suppose it kind of turns into, it's a kind of novella-length story that kind of turns into a ghost story, I suppose you'd say. And it's ultimately about this woman's relationship with her brother who died in prison. And she receives his diary at the start of the story, and it's kind of sort of reminiscences of their childhood together, and then it kind of cuts into the present and becomes more of a ghost story. So.
One of the things that I was really amazed by in your short story collection, Firelight, was just like the breadth of modes of storytelling that you work with. There's a lot of like elements of speculative fiction, sci-fi, ghost stories, like a historical ghost story as well, which I love at the end of the collection. And also, touching on big themes like religion, which is one of the big features of the story that you just read an excerpt from. I'm really curious to know, in terms of the way that you approach storytelling through these kind of genre or particular formats, is that something that was at like the forefront of your mind when you were constructing the stories, or did you kind of just let your imagination go where it needed to go?
I think definitely, like I do try to think about sort of what the genre is when I'm writing something. I think it just helps to give a lot of clarity. I think if you know that what you're trying to do is a ghost story, that kind of focuses you a bit, because, you know, there's sort of kind of ways a ghost story kind of people expect it to run, and I think you can do it in an unexpected way perhaps, but you need to be kind of conscious that you're doing it in a way which is, you know, not typical for the genre or anything like that. And I think just being aware of that really helps. Kind of, I always try to do that because I think it helps guide your writing a lot, being aware of, you know, what you're working in or working against, because it's going to be in the background anyway. The question is whether you're conscious of it, I find. So yeah. Great.
And what about, okay, I'm just curious, like when the genesis of these stories, so you said that you start with the idea of genre, like some of these stories are very, they're complicated, because I feel like with your writing, you're often testing the reader in terms of them trying to understand, is this the reality that I'm used to, or is it suddenly getting away from me, which is like makes for a really interesting reading experience. I'm curious about your mind, I guess, and like where do these stories come from, and have you always wanted to write in this style? Which is very like the many styles that you write in.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know, I've just always liked science fiction and kind of horror stories, like, you know.
Who are your influences?
Like I really like, you know, like I suppose in terms of horror, like Edgar Allan Poe and stuff, and read a lot of Stephen King when I was a kid. And science fiction, you know, Philip K. Dick, those kinds of writers, like just sort of like the canonical writers, I suppose. But like that was what I read a lot of when I was younger, when I was kind of started writing, and I think that's really been the influence on me.
What about, are there any, for people that might be interested in the audience, have you read many other Indigenous or like Black or BIPOC people that are writing in these genres as well?
Samuel Delany was a big one as well. Read a lot of Samuel Delany when I was a kid. Cool. He's a kind of Black science fiction writer from America. He wrote very sort of, he kind of wrote sort of genre fiction, I suppose, like he wrote like a fantasy series and science fiction novels, but he did it in a way which was very kind of conscious of the genre he's working in, and he was very consciously trying to explore kind of contemporary issues with, using these kind of fantasy settings, that kind of thing. So, when I use the word genre, I feel like it doesn't quite adequately, it's not what I'm getting at, because it's almost like a framework, like it's a way of being able to look at a particular issue that could be
set in any temporal setting, but you can use these kind of analytical tools through the framework of sci-fi or whatever it might be. So my next question was going to be about landscape. So when you're coming up with these ideas, in the book there are stories that for the most part seem to be set on Earth as we kind of generally understand it. There may be more like the ghost story elements. And then there are some that you're unsure whether it is this Earth, and you're also really unsure about the temporality of it. Sometimes you actually do say the setting, and sometimes it's more unclear. So can you tell me about, because I felt like you always, no matter what the setting is, you have a lot of detail when you're describing the landscape and like country, so to speak. Is this something that you're like conscious of, and do you enjoy that element of your writing?
Yeah, I think, that's one thing I really enjoy is just like describing landscapes and the sky and that kind of thing. I think it really helps the story feel sort of real. I think if you have a sense of what the world is like in a physical way, I think it really helps people imagine it. And I think, I don't know, I've always felt kind of like it feels indispensable to me as like kind of how you're imagining the world is like, what's the kind of physicality of it in that way. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, cool. So, okay, so to switch to group questions, and please all interject and ask each other questions as we go along. I wanted to ask you all to, if you were to use some describing words, a couple of describing words to describe your own country, what would they be? So like, okay, I haven't actually thought of this myself, so I'm doing it on the fly with all of you. But for my country, there are big grass plains, but it's also very coastal, so like, I don't know, salty, windy, woody, dry, even though it's on the coast. What about everybody else?
I always say like shades of like rainbow, just like at night, the like dusk time, crepuscular time. I know like the country like fully blends into the sky and creates like this full rainbow, and I'm obsessed with that. So shades of rainbows. And dry. I am a desert breed, so yeah, it would be very dry. Polarizing. Wet and all of that.
Word. Susie, the poet, you got something conjuring?
I actually don't. I feel like I spent this book like trying to seek those words and like ended up not using straight up kind of adjectives, but thinking more like it's literally called the body country, to think about how you have an emotional kind of embodied connection to place. And I think, this longing and this, like I said before, grief, I was using more abstract sort of emotional concepts rather than like, words that you might expect, like, lake, water, I don't know, like grass, like, because it is quite flat and dry, being like, it's just north of the Grampians and then up into the sort of like the little desert. So there's lots of scrub and kind of, textures of like bush, I guess. So, and one of the or a couple of the pieces, because like my kind of staccato bio said before, I've worked in the visual arts world for about 10 years and I used a bunch of the poems to respond to those sort of paintings of country, like Frederick McCubbin, like what's his name, Eugene von Gerard, like those ones you see in Fed Square, the kind of Victoria exhibit. And there's this one which is sort of like gum trees that look a bit like the scene in Snow White, the Disney movie, where the trees are like coming out to get her and she's like, "What?" And so, the artist is trying to create this sense of like horror with the landscape, which is what, we saw a lot of that from those colonial painters.
Like, do you mean kind of like the Australian Gothic, or is it?
Yeah. That like that kind of haunting, and this idea that these settlers had come in to kind of tame the landscape, clearing it, creating farmland and whatnot.
With the mystical Aborigines, the fairies somewhere in the distance, perhaps.
Yeah. yeah, so I sort of wanted to describe that, like those emotions and those layers of the landscape rather than it's the sort of visual aspects of it.
Cool. Yeah, actually, I'm so sorry about the bio thing. You'll just have to Google Susie and learn more about what she's been up to in the past.
I remain a mystery, and that's the way I like it.
But I did actually, one of my questions was, because I do kind of want to, in case there are any young writers here that have rocked up for this session, I did want to ask you all, like 10 years ago, did you have a writing or creative practice that you feel is in continuation, or has this been more of a recent expression or development in your life? Were you born creatives?
What's the question? Sorry.
The question is, 10 years ago,
Yes.
were you writing or were you interested in performance? How old is this thing that, you know, you've all been invited here today because you've essentially professionalized your creative expression? So I'm curious about the beginnings. When did it begin? And did you always imagine, like, in 10 years' time that you'd be, you know, were you hoping, aiming to be, like, sitting here doing this kind of thing, or have something published, or be out there performing in the world?
I was in drama class, so probably 10 years ago, yes. Wanting to be a star. But I started doing drag when I moved here, and that kind of helped me drop out of uni and actually do what I wanted to do. And for some reason got an opportunity to write something or be in a writing festival. I think it was the Bogong a few years ago. I was like, not a writer, but that has, very thankful for drag, because that's just very versatile and has like opened opportunities for me to be a writer and be at a literature festival.
Cool.
I think I used to write little stories when I was a kid, and then I had actually 10 years ago I was probably in a bit of a slump. I wasn't really working on much because I was just doing too much uni stuff. But I think once I kind of finished uni and started working, and I just needed something to kind of stop myself from going a bit stir crazy at work. So I got back into it, and very grateful that things have turned out the way they have.
Yeah, I think for me, 10 years ago, I was kind of like hovering on the outside of like the literary scene in Melbourne, not on the outside, maybe on the inside, but right in the nexus of it. But I wasn't kind of writing stuff that really like connected. Like I was just sort of producing little poems for we were all writing blogs at that moment in time. Yes. So I just was writing like thankless internet poetry, and then at some point
writing into the abyss.
100%.
Yeah, I remember
But at
that.
some point I picked up Alison Whittaker's Lemons in the Chicken Wire, and she had just won the Black and White Fellowship, and that was the first time that I had read poetry from a young black woman that really, it just connected with me. And I'd been reading, Aboriginal fiction, like My Place and things like this, that just wasn't landing. And it really wasn't until I read Alison's work that I went, oh my God, I could write just about who I am and be authentic in my writing practice. And that kind of heralded this new chapter for me. And I started writing about more like myself and my identity and my family, not in a way that would expose everything, but just in a way that felt like kind of necessary to create this grounded writing practice. And I think over that 10 years, I, had a few awards that kind of, people were starting to recognise the shift in my work, and so was I. So that's kind of, the collection does actually span like quite a long time. And,
which is great. This is your debut collection, hey?
Yeah, it is. And it kind of, I think since I read Alison's book, I was like, I'm going to win that Black and White Fellowship. And then after I submitted like 2 kind of half-cooked manuscripts, and then the third time, that's what you're looking at.
Congrats. I love the perseverance. I think that's a really interesting point, actually, that despite, and I know that your mum owns a bookshop, right, in Horsham, so it's like despite having access to Aboriginal writers from, I don't know whether what you're talking about is necessarily generational, but it's interesting that, it's almost about waiting to find someone that you can somehow go, that's me, like that makes sense. And when that's someone from your own generation, that's a really exciting moment. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that feeling. So, okay, there's 15 minutes left. I don't love having really long Q&As. I would rather talk to the people that you're here to see and listen to. So I think we'll do 10 minutes of Q&A, and maybe we'll yarn for a couple more minutes, because there was one more question I wanted to ask you all about. Oh no, it's a bit silly, I don't know. Okay. Something that, well, it's just that when I was preparing for this, I really just did notice that you're all dealing and interested in temporality that is non-linear, that is, for want of a better word, cosmic. It's not more than human, perhaps, is the way to do it. Why is that? Where does that interest come from? That's a hard question to answer. It's a bit like, why do you write? But why are you interested in that?
I guess like acknowledging culturally, that's kind of how, at least, blackfellas Adundam understand time is cyclical and definitely not linear, and really like, I kind of, my worlds that I kind of write in are very, are like after, I like call them like AD, but like after decolonization, whatever that so looks like, and whenever that so may be, like, but that's then, but because it so looks like, maybe like, because it so looks like 1,000 years ago, it just is kind of the same, and I know kind of, obviously there's going to be so many differences because of now, I know, time.
What is it?
Yeah, I think I think it's just really fascinating just to think about, just the scope of like history, and things which seem so permanent can like vanish so quickly, and people are a product of a particular time period or era, and then the circumstances can be totally different in 1,000 years or 2,000 years or 10,000 years, and a totally different kind of person will have emerged, or different kinds of people. It's I just find that really fascinating, and the kind of history we have is so brief, and recorded history is just so brief, I suppose. And there's just millennia which are just kind of blind to us in a lot of ways, I think. So yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, creativity is a great space for trying to lean into the feeling of an experience or a temporality pre-C, pre-colonization.
Yeah, I guess if there was any, like, my book is kind of gentle, but if there was like a political element to it, it is this kind of insistence of the cyclical time and the sort of deep time of Wagaya and Wamba Wamba people, because I think it's a really, like, to this day, it's quite strongly just farmland. We have strong Watchabollock mob up there who are doing fantastic, like, cultural, like, land management stuff, and the mob around Garryword, the Grampians as well, which is a little further south than my country. But I think for the large part, the narrative is super, like, European. People, aren't as connected to acknowledging mob and country as we are in the metro, regions. And I ran in, this old high school friend of mine who now lives in Canada was back in Australia, and we caught up recently, and she came to a reading that I did. She was so proud and excited because she's known me since we were little, and consequently has known about my Aboriginality my whole life, our whole lives. But I still think there was this, she was freaking out about, because we just grew up on farms down the road from one another. And she was freaking out about the way that I was insisting a different story. And it was really, at that moment, I realised that my work does have a political edge to it, even with people who I love and I would never want to sort of upset them. I'm simply saying what is, which is Aboriginal people have existed and still do exist on these lands. And, and just sort of saying, it's like this, it's continuing. Was there before our farms were, and will go on after we move to wherever we go to.
That's really beautiful. Thank you. Maybe we should go to question time if there are any. We can ask each other questions as well. Was that one? No, just an elbow. Oh, sorry. Yes, Jane, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to know what's next for all of you.
That was one of my questions.
That was one of your questions. I missed the first half of the session, so you might have already asked it, but I want to know what's next.
Trying to write a novel at the moment, which is, I didn't think would be easy, but is even way harder than I thought it would be. So it's going to be years in the making probably, but it's kind of enjoyable. But it's satisfying. But hopefully it'll get there.
Yeah, John and I were talking about this before the event. How because I'm trying to write a novel as well, and as a poet, someone said to me just write hundreds of little prose poems, and I was like, nah. But that's kind of the long-term project for me. But I also just quit my job to pursue writing.
Congratulations!
Which is going to be, it's also terrifying in its own way.
Yeah.
Exciting though.
That's really interesting because I feel like this year every poet I'm talking to is I'm writing a novel. Why are we all writing novels all of us?
You're writing a book as well, aren't you?
I mean, I'm trying.
Yeah, we're all trying.
Yeah, we're trying. Were there any other questions? I feel like Ali and Ari were mumbling to each other. Is it a comment? No.
Stone, are you working on any performances that we can come and see?
So true. Rising Festival, just the program got announced. Cerulean and I will be doing a production for Rising Festival. I assume that we'll have some writing. That will probably be mine. June, May. I don't know, look at the program, but it's there. We're doing that.
Late May, early June, I think.
Yeah, debut 31st of May into June, It's a party. I think we're doing the after party to the War on P band performance beforehand. So
Deadly.
It's a packed night. A lot of performances, I guess, at the same time.
Can I ask? I'm just taking over.
Please.
With your, because performance and movement, they are they're so embodied, but you seem to use words as a bit of an anchor to shape story. And how can you just talk about that relationship and the sort of translation into the body of words?
Totally. I do not normally like hearing my voice, and so I normally record my writing, and then that is, I'm in the Alluvium and the Fae, we were performing we were lip syncing to my poems and stuff. So yeah, it's just more of wanting to incorporate that, but I don't want to do it on the night, so then I record it. Does that answer? Does that?
Well, also like about the sort of, because like I've dabbled in acting over the last couple of years, and I find the sort of, it's not my natural thing, like just being a physical being, and it's really interesting to come to like, you know, it's a vulnerable thing to like just put your body out there. I was just curious if you've, what that relationship's like.
Yeah, I guess it's like an embodiment of kind of the whole me being a crystalline gem being in my performance style is very like lithe and I know fragmented and at times smooth. I like trying to work. I know, trying to think about my body as like this whole biomechanical thing that I can move around and like, I know, dissociate from while I'm performing, I guess. And like, that is kind of, like when I'm writing, I'm thinking of like how to perform it and how to like, how that's, the world is very performative and as much as this world is,
Thank you.
Have there been any questions in the time since? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mob. I've really appreciated this conversation and I've like loved preparing for it because you just get to spend so much concentrated time with people's work. So yeah, definitely check out what Stone's got coming up. And also these two books, they're both published last year or 2023. So we've got The Body Country, Susie Anderson, and Firelight by John Morrissey. Thank you so much. Big round of applause and Free Palestine.